What do hundreds of Springsteen songs have in common? They were all recorded by the one and only Toby Scott. Toby got his start at LA's renowned Clover Recording, working with artists including Bette Midler, the Manhattan Transfer, Booker T and the MGs, Robert Palmer, Bob Dylan, and Tommy Tutone, to name a few. At Clover, he worked with producers including Steve Cropper, Tom Dowd, Ron Nevison, and Springsteen's producer, Chuck Plotkin. Chuck had Toby mix The River, which led to 3.5 decades of working hand-in-hand with Springsteen. After completing Born in the USA and the ensuing Live 75-85, Bruce wanted to attempt something different, and he turned to Toby to create the sounds that became Bruce's Tunnel of Love. As you'll hear, Toby is our kind of pro. No nonsense, no tricks, no BS. Our hosts were lucky to bump into Toby at last year's AES at our live episode with his close friend and collaborator, Bob Clearmountain. Toby graciously agreed to sit down for an impromptu chat. Listen in as he recalls his sessions with Bruce and what it's like to work in the studio with Bob Dylan. Toby refers to his adventures as war stories, but for us, they're all Star Wars.
Great running into you. As we mentioned, we're going to be talking to Bob Clearmountain.
Yes.
And you happen to be standing with him, which to me was a very surreal, historic moment in my life. Anyway.
Bob and I have been friends close to 38 years, right, something like that. You know, we traded off sort of in 1980. He had done a mix of the River album.
Right, which you recorded.
No. Neil Dorfman recorded it. Bob actually recorded one song, and then I think he saw that it was going to be a never-ending project, and so he might have decided to move on to other things to increase his resume, which is incredible at this point in time. Yeah. I think you'd probably have to scroll through his list of credits for days on the internet.
Well, besides just credits, classic records.
Yes, classic records.
We actually did the opposite. We went through records he didn't work on, and we eliminated those. It was easier.
Exactly. But, yeah, he had done a mix on The River, and Bruce decided to do a double album thing or something. And so I was lucky enough to pass the audition to mix that.
Was that the first time you worked with Bruce?
Actually, I had met him in 1978. The producer I worked with, Chuck Plotkin, had been roped into mixing reluctantly because Chuck said, I'm a producer, I'm not a mixer, the Darkness on the Edge of Town album. And finally they had continued on for so many weeks and months that Chuck said, we got to go out to L.A. I've got to sleep in my own bed. And so he came out to L.A., brought it to the studio that he owned, Clover Studios, and I was the chief engineer. Right. Yeah, I sort of ran the place. And he said, well, they want me to mix it. And I said, fine. And so I just stood behind him. He mixed one song. I forget which song it was, but we mixed the last song for it. And then we went through some sequencing to determine the sequence, which was interesting in that Chuck and I would go out the back door and up the alley to Crystal, which was Stevie Wonder's place. And they had a mastering lathe in there. So we'd take the songs and we'd have them master 45s of each of the songs. And then we'd come back over to Clover, 2 turntables side by side, and I'd be DJ.
Oh, the original, all right.
They'd say, well, let's start with this song. So I'd put it on turntable A, and then halfway through, Bruce or somebody go, now go to this one. And then I'd put that on, cue it up on turntable B, and then I'd go back and forth.
That's amazing.
And we'd listen through to the record a few times, and then he'd say, okay, well, this is the sequence. And then I'd actually cut it together on tape.
It's It's amazing to think that that's, in order to really hear a sequence in real time, you had to do that. There was no other way other than queuing up the tape machine.
Well, yeah.
Well, you could like do infinite cuts and just keep moving stuff around, but that would take forever.
Well, and you also you're playing back the master tape.
Yeah.
Right.
The only other way to do it would probably be just make up innumerable sequences and put them onto a cassette to listen to them. But
so you're the original DJ.
Exactly.
Well, it was my small part in that record.
Did you do any scratching in between?
Yeah, no.
So what was Clover?
Clover was a one-room studio on Santa Monica Boulevard. Mm-hmm. It was just east of Vine Street. And at the corner of Vine at the time was Gold Star, which was Phil Spector's favorite place. And shortly before I arrived there, they had removed the echo chamber in the back room at Clover, which was the live chamber.
For Gold Star?
For Gold Star.
Wow. So wasn't their chamber was not even in the same facility?
No, we were 50 yards down the road. But Clover was a one-room studio. When I first started there, we had the Clover console, which was the first transformerless console, as far as I know, ever made. And there were only two of them. One was at Clover Studios, and the other was the Beach Boys had it. And they had a studio in Santa Monica later. I think it was the record after Pet Sounds, but it was a record that was like, oh, wow, this sounds great. And the console was real good. And I worked at Clover for 7 years. It was a one-room place, and we did an assortment. I did Bob Dylan record in there, Bruce's. We finished up that Darkness record. The River album, I mixed that in there. I did a Bette Midler album in there, and a certain others, Manhattan Transfer.
Big records.
Yeah, well, prior to me, my sort of original predecessor to me was a guy named Robert Appert, who was a fairly famous, well-known engineer. You may not know his name, but he had recorded at Clover Neil Sedaka's Back. Also,
classic.
Little Feat's Dixie Chicken record.
Oh, great.
The studio had also been, Linda Ronstadt did part of a record there. James Taylor did part of Fire and Ice there. Yvonne Elliman did a couple of her hits there. I did a Robert Palmer album in there. Wow. It was just one of these studios that people liked the studio. Right. Musicians just... Yeah. My most famous recollection is a jam session that we had one night. I don't even know what we were doing before then, but the players came in, and drums was Keith Moon. Bass was either David Hungate or Duck Dunn. One of the guitars was Steve Cropper, who was sort of a resident producer at the studio.
Oh, no kidding.
And the other guitar player was Ronnie Wood, and I forget whether there was anybody else.
Sounds like it must have been a pretty fun evening as well.
It was.
So where are those tapes?
I don't know. They probably went up into the library at Clover, and since it was just a session, who knows what happened to it.
Amazing. When you started there, were you already engineering, or did you learn there?
I had been sort of learning engineering at home. I had taken a class with a company that was like the first, how to be an engineer class. I think it was called the Recording Institute of America or something like that. It was at a studio, Ed LeBeau's studio or something on Sunset Boulevard or somewhere down there. And during the course of the class, I seemed to excel. The engineer that was the instructor asked me to come with him as his personal assistant out on his gigs that he would go to, and I did that. And then I took the advanced class.
Nice.
And that instructor was Keith Olson. And Keith had just finished the Fleetwood Mac album.
Holy cow.
Yes. And a lot of people don't know all these backstories.
Right.
But now these classes were 6 weeks long, 1 day a week for 3 hours. It wasn't what classes are now.
Right.
But so when I was in the second class, it happened to be at Paramount Studios, which was directly across the street from Clover. And I went through like 2 weeks of classes, and I went, wow, there's 5 other people in the class. When class is over, these people are going to be flooding the market, and it's going to be hard to get a job.
Right.
So I basically bogus up a resume and had already had a list of my favorite studios, because I was a guy that I would look on the back of records and see who engineered this, where was it done, who were the musicians. Years before this, I had been looking over one of these records with a friend, And we said, oh, it'd be so cool to be like a side musician, like a Willie Weeks or somebody that plays on all these incredible records, but doesn't get accosted in the street, can do what he wants to, and as it turned out, I got there. But so I made up my resume and went out to the record plant, Wally Hyder's, Sound Factory, Sunset Sound, all these big places. And I was quite, probably. And I took my resume in, and then the next day I'd call them back. I want an appointment with the studio manager, like that. And then I'd go back the third day. And in one of these rounds, I walked into Clover and ran into the studio manager, and he said, well, as a matter of fact, we do need an assistant. Would you be willing to try? And I said, sure. And he goes, tonight, 6 o'clock. I said, I'll be there.
All night.
Yeah. I was working on a disco record. But I showed up, and the next day I went in, and he said, well, the assistant engineer on the project gave you a favorable report. You did what assistants should do, which is keep quiet, try not to be seen, and just fill in the gaps wherever is necessary. And he said, so you got a job. You can start tonight. And I was like, oh, great. And he goes, one small little detail. We can't pay you. And I said, that's okay. I've saved. Right. And so it was, 3 or 4 months before I actually got paid. Right. Other than on the weekends, the studio was used by Nocturne Records, which was a jazz label. And they would come in on Saturday and Sunday, and I would come in and help. Although they had been doing this for years and they didn't need any help. The engineer was completely competent. And those guys, they would give me a tip. But probably the best tips that I got were how to record.
Right.
In that I learned that, especially in jazz, you don't spread everybody out. And this works well in rock, too. You keep them close together.
Yeah, close, right.
Because that way, whatever leakage there is does not make it sound like you're in a basketball gymnasium.
Right.
It's very tight. That and other interesting aspects of...
I would assume, are you a native Californian?
Yes, I guess I am to a degree. I was born in California, but I didn't live there much. My father was in the service.
So you traveled.
So it wasn't until I was, 12 or something like that we moved back to California, and then I ended up in Southern California.
Right. But, so you stayed at Clover for how long?
I stayed there for 7 years. What
an era to be in Southern
Steve
California.
Cropper was the sort of the resident producer there, and I got to work with him. And this was in the mid-'70s when producers didn't use the bands that were signed. They used studio musicians. Right. And so the standard band was Jeff Porcaro on drums, David Hungate on bass. Steve Cropper would play one guitar. A guy named Jay Graydon would play the other guitar player. And then we had this little-known piano player named David Foster. And these guys would come in, and they would just kill it. David would write out a little chart. So that was like the house band? Yeah, that was like the house band.
Right. And were they credited on the records, or was just no credit at all?
No, I don't think they got credit. Because most of the groups that Steve produced were groups.
They had their own names.
Yeah, the Kate Brothers. Well, he produced that Yvonne Elliman, If You Can't Buy Me, or whatever it was, and a few others. Well, they did get credit. We did a couple of Ned Doheny albums. He was Doheny Drive, Doheny Beach, and used those guys. So they did get credit, where it was if it wasn't a band.
And was Steve bringing a certain technique that you hadn't seen before, or was it familiar to you?
Well, it seemed to be the technique of the time. Mm-hmm. We were recording to 16-track. There wasn't a lot of futzing around deciding well, it was either good or not good.
Right.
And 16-track sort of limited the number of tracks and overdubs you can do without getting into a jigsaw puzzle of figuring out, okay, the background vocals are go here, and there's a little space, and we can put a tambourine in between there,
right,
to fill up every track available. But the record-making process was essentially you record the entire band, whatever band it was, for basic tracking, as many people as possible. That would take a week, possibly 2. And this was before the days of lockout, so we're only working noon to 6,
right,
or 7 to 1, something like that. But you'd record the basic tracks, and then there'd be like 2-day segments that, let's put percussion on it. Let's put overdub keyboards, fixing guitars, horns, background vocals, lead vocal at some point in there, and then strings. And then you mix it.
Right.
How many tracks would the basic tracks be? Like if you had 5 players, 2 guitar, bass, drums, and keyboards, would you string them along like 8 tracks or something?
Probably about that. I think drums were generally 4 tracks.
Right. Did you often have to do submixes to open up tracks?
Yes. The highest degree of submixing was on the Robert Palmer album, which I was just an assistant on that. But the engineer was Phil Brown, who was, he had done like Led Zeppelin, a lot of big English albums. He was from England. I forget what he started out with the drums as, but eventually he kept mixing them down until the drums were on, I believe, 1 track. Right. But this is a man that was doing Led Zeppelin with 4 tracks or whatever. So, we would put drums would be 4 tracks, bass is 1, guitar 1, another guitar 2, piano, possibly just 1 track,
right?
Which I still revert to those old things.
Right.
One of the things which, for your listeners, this is just war stories and history. At around this time in the mid-late 70s, there was a button which I wish I'd kept one. And it was like purple and said back to mono.
Yeah,
and it was a button that Phil Spector was putting around because at that point in time, somebody had come up with the Boss chorus, and I think it was also the Rhodes was stereo.
Right.
And so there was a lot of stuff which I still refer to as monophonic stereo or stereophonic mono. And it's like, where is that keyboard? It's on the left, it's on the right, it's everywhere. And then drums were, it was the era of the big panning tom-tom, boom, 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 from one side of the stereo to the other. I was never a big fan of that. Right. I get pianos and I mono them and put it on the left.
Right. Everything's nice and phase coherent.
Yes. Yeah. It's nice when that little phase meter is going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I would assume that it was the tail end of Clover that you did The River, you were involved in that stuff. And how did it come to be that, so did you leave there and then start working with Bruce?
No, I did the River album and then an assortment of other albums and began gleaning my way out of Clover. I got other jobs for mixing and doing things. And in my last years of Clover, probably somewhere around between 80 and 82, some of the producers that were regulars would say, geez, we really like your work, but we don't always want to work at Clover.
Right.
And I said, I'll move. So I started to do records elsewhere.
Yeah, freelance.
And then in 82, I had taken 3 or 4 months off, came back to Clover to mix a record, and the people decided against doing it. I don't know what happened. They weren't ready. And Bruce had come in wanting me to mix, what was it, Gary Bond's record, On the Line, I think. Right. And I mixed that and liked that. Everybody was good. And Steve Van Zandt had co-produced it with him. And then Steve Van Zandt said, well, I've got a record, and this Bonds record has horns and I like your mix. Would you do that one? I said, okay. So I started mixing
Wasn't
Steve's
the Apartheid record, was it the one?
No, it was his first record called Men Without Women.
Oh.
And I think I mixed 2, 3, 4 songs. And then Bruce didn't make a big deal out of it, but he wanted to start on his next record. And so we all sort of moved to New York. And that's when, many would say that this was fun, and it was fun. So from noon until 6 p.m., I worked with Steve mixing, or I recorded 4 additional songs because he liked the mixes so much. He wrote 4 more songs for his record. And then at 6 o'clock, we would stop there. And that was at the Hit Factory on 53rd.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And he and I would walk down to the power station where we'd check in. And at 7 o'clock, we would start on Bruce's record, which became Born in the USA.
Right.
And I'd work until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I had all morning off until noon.
As you're mentioning that, just the thought of, so 53rd Street was Hit Factory.
Yeah.
57th was Media. 53rd was Power Station. Record plant was 44th.
44th.
Yeah.
There was just little, it's kind of hard to imagine this little half of square mile.
Yeah.
Where all
Yeah.
these people were
All those
running.
magical,
And I
all
think,
the magical
in the Brill
records.
Building.
I think also, didn't Phil Ramone have a studio in there?
A&R.
right in that-
A&R was on
was on
like
48th.
50th or something.
Yeah.
It was in the
6th
same area,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never thought of it that way, but it was all pretty close together.
Yeah, I was coming back from dinner last night, and I walked right by the old record plant building. I grew up at the record plant. I started assisting there in 80.
Yeah.
But I just got chills, and I had to take a selfie of the address, 321 West 44th, and I just stood there going oh my God, I spent 8 years there.
To a degree, it's still there. Sony has
Birdland.
Battery Studios up there on the 10th
Right.
floor.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And there's no real studios per se. I don't
But
even know
Studio
if you
A
could record a band.
and B is Birdland, the
Yeah,
jazz
Birdland.
club. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. Which is kind of weird being in there going, I'm actually sitting in that exact spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you came to New York to work at Power Station, was that, as the engineer, was that your decision?
No, they had recorded The River there.
Right.
And they liked the sound of the room. Because,
Studio A?
Yes. That had come about because when they were doing Darkness, I believe, they were at Record Plant, and they, by some means or another, they needed a studio, and they moved them into the unfinished, I believe, Studio B, which still had a concrete floor, and it was totally unacoustically treated.
Right.
And they liked the sound of this live room. Bruce was sort of moving from the Darkness,
Right.
no reverb, into this idea of a more live sound.
Right.
So then they moved over to the Power Station. I don't know how they found out about it, but they moved there, did the River album and ensuing recording for that record there. And so then when it came time for his next record, the Power Station was the place to go.
Right.
And we did 10 or more tracks in there. And then we moved to the Hit Factory. There was a little political
Yeah, I know all
whatever,
about
and,
it.
And
Columbia Records.
They asked me, they said, can you get this sound, which was that Born in the USA
Right.
sort of boom, boom. Can you get this sound somewhere else? Well, since I had manufactured it at the Power Station, I said, yeah, sure. So we moved over to the Hit Factory to the, as Eddie called it, Studio A1. He had some bizarre nomenclature so that no one would feel as though they were in a secondary studio.
Right.
So we ended up doing the majority of it there. And then when it came time to mix, we did move back to the Power Station up to the C room,
Right.
which is where Bob Clearmountain, did his thing. And it was very good. We had no problem with it.
Right. I mean, that was a massive record. That was probably to date, at that time, his biggest record, breakthrough record.
Mm-hmm.
Was Tunnel of Love next?
No. Actually, we started to work on Born in the USA, and things either went too fast or Bruce was still deciding what he wanted to do. But we then diverted to work on the Nebraska record.
Oh, yeah.
Which actually came out after The River, before Born in the USA. And that's a whole story in itself, but we won't go into that. Next podcast.
Yeah.
We started Born in the USA, stopped it, finished, and finally got the Nebraska record mastered. And then Chuck and I had to go back to California, where we started a Bette Midler record. And during that time, Bruce came out. We did some work in late 82 and early 83. Then springtime or late winter of 83, we resumed work on Born in the USA and worked pretty much straight through until 84. Then worked on a live album. And that was the 75 to 85 album.
Right.
And then after that, one day he called me up and he said, "Don't we have some recording equipment?" Yeah. So I set it up and we recorded, we started Tunnel of Love in...
Where did you set it up?
In Rumson?
You set it up in his house?
In what we called the carriage house. It was literally the carriage house for this house and property that he had in Rumson. We zipped through that in 2 or 3 weeks, something like that.
That's amazing.
We're talking Tunnel of Love?
Yeah, most of the songs.
2 or 3
and
weeks.
And then in...
It's like Darkness there's that documentary, The Promise, that's about the making of Darkness, and that took a year.
Well, when I came on board, and especially the recording of Born in the USA, I tend to be quick.
Right.
And so, whereas drum sounds for Darkness were weeks and months.
Right.
And The River, if Neil got a chance, he'd take time and get them just right. If he didn't get a chance, it's whatever. I was quite quick, so I generally would get drum sounds in, like 10, 15 minutes.
And then boom.
And on with the rest of it.
And it wasn't the E Street Band, right?
No, that was, Bruce had asked me, he said, "I want to set up this stuff." And he goes, "Geez, I'd like to do stuff on my own. Do you know how to operate any of this equipment?" I said, "Yes." It happened that in 86, I guess it was, scrambling for freelance work, which I'm still looking, anyone out there, if you need a good engineer mixer. I worked with a guy named John Roby, who was a big dance guy. He was one of these original one-man bands, sort of like Mutt Lange, in the played everything, did it, and that's it. And I engineered for him. And so he gave me good education, thank you, John, on drum machines, changing keys and things like that, on keyboards, how to adjust them and things like that. So when Bruce said, "Yeah, I need a little help on that," I said, "I can do this." And so I programmed all the drums on Tunnel of Love.
Wow.
And we had a Kurzweil, which I would program that for. You don't program it, you sort of choose the sound.
Right.
But if it was in a key that he was unfamiliar with on a keyboard, I would change the key around and all that stuff.
So you and him spent a lot of time, just the two of you in the room?
Yes. Yeah, that was it. And we did go out to A&M Studios sometime in late spring or early summer and recorded one song that made the record, One Step Up.
Oh, God. Are you kidding?
And then we went back to New Jersey.
One of my favorite.
After a while, he had a song, and he goes, "Can you program the drums more than just, a 1 or a 2 bar pattern?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So we spent a little bit of time, and I programmed the drum track for Tunnel of Love.
Wow.
Which
is on a Lindrum?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And it took a while, but we got it. And I told him, "Now, once I get a program, you got to play it the same way." And he knew. And Bruce is just a fabulous musician. So I programmed it, and it took a few times. Then he finally goes, "Yeah, that's right." So then he played it, and we finished the songs fairly quickly. It took a little bit of time because he wanted the sound effects. And so I went down to the Point Pleasant Amusement Park. And one time I recorded kids, on the with the roller coaster there. It didn't turn out quite as good. He said, I wanted a little bit more close and like that. So I went back down, and this time I got one of the guys that ran the roller coaster. And he was quite knowledgeable. He just went out and he got a bunch of 13 and 14-year-old girls and boys and gave them free tickets, put them on the roller coaster, explained to them what. And we would sit there and we would point them when we wanted them to scream. And I had 2 mics out there on a little remote thing into a F1 digital recorder. I recorded it, and then I put it back and laid it in to the beginning and the end of the song. And that was the last song that we did.
And that was on analog, Tunnel of Love?
No, Tunnel of Love was recorded on what I call linear digital.
3M?
It was a Sony 3324 tape.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
But, yeah, and we did that, and I think
Why do you call it linear digital?
Because it's tape.
Moving.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Moves. You know, nowadays it's not linear. You can go anywhere in an instant.
Right.
So it's a little quicker.
And so did you bring one of those machines into his place in Rumson?
Yes. That's what we started out. That's what all of Tunnel of Love was.
Was that the first record that you used that machine on?
No. I had used that machine on the live album. And that was a process of going through the live recordings. When I'd get one that they liked, I would transfer it over to the 3324.
And was it because it had more tracks, or just no tape noise, or it was
no tape noise? I could fit 3, 4, 5 songs on a reel,
right?
Because their reels are like 30 minutes of time. You know, various logistical things. Right. Now thinking back, having archived virtually everything he has, the early days of digital were the days of where we were basically, I guess, driving through the fog far too fast and not realizing that we had already driven the car off of a cliff and that we were on a slow descent to the rocks below. And those rocks being the fact that when you record at 44.1 16-bit, there is no higher fidelity.
Right.
And there is plenty of lower fidelity to that format.
Right.
Analog, if you could record everything analog, that'd be great, because you can always upgrade to 24-bit, 96K, 192, whatever, you know, or DSD, something like that. But
you said you've archived, you've gone back and listened to the multi-tracks of that stuff?
Yes. Archived for the digital multi-tracks and even 2-track digital masters, they were transferred to a digital wave file format. Right. So they're no longer linear.
Right.
They're just
I mean, as a huge fan of Tunnel of Love, I knew that it had a sound. And I couldn't tell if it was because it wasn't his band and there was some modern technology involved, but I thought it sounded fucking great. But I knew that we were into something a little different.
It was, I liked that record. I feel that other than, you know, like Born in the USA or a couple of the others, I like Tunnel of Love probably the most, because it was Bruce's first record that was clear.
Yeah.
And not
exactly
not a mass
not
of
guitars. That's
you know,
right.
tons of guitars and this, that, and the other thing of you know, as he had wanted, the Phil Spector wall of sound.
Right.
Well, this was very clean. You know, to be perfectly honest, I was a little upset at the fact that the record, which I thought was of a quality good enough to qualify for a engineering nomination, but it was released 3 days after the cutoff.
Oh, shit.
It was released like October 3rd.
Wow.
At September 30th or 31st is the cutoff for the Grammy nomination.
Well, I'll tell you what,
and
we're going to give you an honorary
and we
Grammy
well
here.
know that
We'll give you an honorary Geary.
when it goes to the following year, you vote in January, and it's like,
Right.
oh, what? And it can't be part of it.
Right.
But yeah, it was a great record. I really liked it. It was Bruce and I. He enjoyed it.
That's kind of amazing that to be part of something that it still holds up.
Right.
I mean,
it's a good record.
I mean, it's some of his best writing. It's one of his most unique sounding records.
Yeah.
And also that, I think you put your finger on it, it's not as dense as anything he had done before. There's not a lot of guitars. I mean, there's some guitars, beautiful keyboard sounds, and the drums were programmed, and it never occurred to me that they were really programmed.
Did you process them after the fact? Or put them through
Bob
Roommack?
Clearmountain mixed the record, and he did replace some of the sounds. I think perhaps the kick and the snare.
Right.
Replace them. The hi-hat is difficult to
Did you blow them out into a room, or just was there any, or
Nope.
that was just straight
That was just
digital?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, whatever ambiance there was to it
Right.
was Clearmountain.
Right.
You know, who, well, I saw you guys when
Yeah, we're going to
when we were talking to Bob.
about this
and,
exact thing.
Yeah, we got a bone to pick
that's
with
where
him
we
anyway.
started. That's where we started this conversation.
exactly.
Was that the fact that I've known Bob since basically 1980, and then in 82, 83, when he came in to mix the Born in the USA, I had done mixes, and I wasn't pleased with them, and John and Bruce weren't pleased with them, and I suggested maybe we ought to get another mixer. And so I did audition another guy.
You did really? Wow.
And then Bob, and then we listened to him and decided, well, Bob's the guy. And so we did it. And
would you give him notes or talk him through?
they kept me on the sessions during the mix, which it was a little strange for me, almost awkward, because when we started mixing, I was like, okay, guys, I'll see you later. It's been swell. They went, no, you're not going anywhere. We want you here.
You know where the bodies are buried.
And so when Bob would have a mix ready, Bruce would go into the control room with John and Chuck and myself. And if Bruce would say, oh, this sounds pretty good, but you know, that keyboard there, or this thing, it doesn't sound quite right. Toby, do you know what you did on that? I'd say, yeah. And he'd go, well, talk to Bob. And so I'd say, oh, well, Bob, that keyboard in the rough mix, which Bruce always loved my rough mixes. You go, that keyboard in the rough mix, that keyboard actually isn't in the mix. I put it into this short, 1.5 second SPX 90 or something, and then I took it out of the stereo bus. So all you're hearing is the sound of the keyboard in the reverb. Bob, oh, okay, I can do that. We got along great. He's still, I admire him as the best mixer in the world and a great guy all around.
Well, it kind of blew, having Tunnel of Love be sort of a major record in my growing up, so to speak, even though I was an adult by then, to see both you guys standing there kind of was a little psychedelic.
Yeah, it was a little,
in the most beautiful way.
Bob and I are two people that have probably worked on more songs for a single artist than anyone else. Right. Because Bob had done The River. He mixed a 10-song album that was a single album, came out a couple of years ago. And then Born in the USA, Tunnel of Love, almost everything since then, and various demos. And so as we were standing there, I said, geez, together we've probably worked on 100, maybe 150 or 200 songs. And Bob goes, yeah, probably. We'd have to sit down and count them.
Right.
So,
but also the fact it's not just 200 songs, it's 200 Bruce Springsteen songs. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's a good writer.
He's okay. Yeah, he's getting there.
So was there a standard way of doing vocals with him?
No. I put a mic up and
he would sing.
He sings.
I love that.
In most cases, it's a take.
Right.
Maybe.
Right. You're not like comping stuff.
Oh, no.
I would think that, yeah.
No, I think I might have put together a vocal, but no.
Yeah.
It's actually his sort of take on a vocal is a technique that I use to avoid endless takes with other artists. And if someone wants to sing their vocal, fine. And they sing it, and they go, can I do that one more time? Yeah. And they do it one more time, and they go, can I do that one more time? And I go, okay, this will be your third one. They do it, and then they go, I can get that better. Can I do it one more time? And I go, no.
Wow.
They go, well, why can't I do that? Because I go, tell me what you're going to do to make it better. And they go, well, it'll just be better. I go, no, you got to let me know what's better. And my definition of better means that you're going to sing it with a different tone in your voice, a different delivery of phrasing, or if there was a pitch problem, you're going to sing it without pitch problems, or something like that. Because, I've just heard you record 3 vocals. I've listened to them, and other than a minor pitch issue here and there, the delivery seems good.
Right.
And why should we continue doing this? And they're like, huh? And I never give them the key as to what they have to say. But if they said, oh, well, I want to sing it harder, or I want to sing it softer, or I want to sing it from back in my throat more, you just got to give me a different reason. But I don't tell them.
Right.
And so then they're like, no, I just want to get it better.
No, but that's great that you kind of lead them without leading them to actually clarify it to themselves and to you.
Yeah. Well, the next day when they come in or something, I go, well, you take these 3 back there and listen to them. And then when you come to a conclusion of what you want to do and what you consider better,
right,
then we'll talk about it. So then when they come in the next day and they're like, well, usually by then they've decided, I need to sing it louder or something. And I'll go, that's it. That's your key to being able to do it more.
Right.
Not a dozen more times, but I'll give you 3 more.
Yeah, 3 more.
That's calling it louder.
That's great.
And, it enlightens them. It gives them a goal to go for.
I also like the fact that you don't just say, hey, let's get another one. You let them say to you, can I do one more?
Yeah.
Very subtle.
It's their record.
Yeah.
I'm just there to record the performance. I think a lot of engineers sometimes miss out on that.
Right.
They think it's their performance.
And so all of the Bruce records you did were with Chuck?
Chuck.
Was he involved in...
Tunnel
of Love?
Was, yes, he came on, conducted some of the overdubs on a few of the songs on Tunnel of Love, and then when we went to A&M, the recording out there, and then in the mixing, he was involved in that. In 2001, Bruce went with Brendan O'Brien.
Right.
And so Chuck wasn't a part of it.
Right.
Brendan was the sole producer of that.
So you and Chuck had a language?
Yeah.
And would you often give him some production ideas? And
to a certain degree. I have a philosophy of recording and production that is basically don't let them do something stupid and make a big mistake. And don't let them miss out on doing something that could be an improvement. So with Bruce or Chuck or any artist, if they say, hey, let's put a kazoo on this or something, I'll go, all right, whatever you want. If the kazoo goes on and I think, this is not happening.
This is a kazoo.
I'll do a mix without the kazoo.
Right.
And just to see if they'll buy it. And then if they're doing something where I go, kazoo would really make this song. I wait until they're all done and they're ready to move on. Then I'll go, why don't we try a kazoo doing this part or that part? And the same with Chuck. He was a very rhythmic guy. From Chuck I learned, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are just the most boringly obvious beats in the world. It's 1 and two and four and, those ands in between there, put stuff in there. He and I had worked on a number of groups where even from the pre-production stage of, okay, let's talk about your songs. What are your favorite songs? What songs do you want? And the group would have, they're on a cassette or something like that. We'd listen to it. Okay. And I was just sort of the fly on the wall watching Chuck, but learned, and I'd throw my 2 cents worth in on occasion. And he had a very interesting, tactful technique of guiding people to how to write a song. As an initial songwriter, you want to stay away from oddball things like the first verse is 8 bars and the second verse is 7, or it's 9, or something's oddball verses and things like that. And, or the chorus is,
different every
4
time.
bars or something like that. Chuck had a technique which I use, if need be, to point out the error of their ways. Or not the error, but that. And I always, when I'm going through this and I tell the people, I go, the only thing I have to say, which is a disclaimer of, I've worked for a man that can break all these rules and you don't know it, which is the cool way. Right. If anyone is a music aficionado and can count time, listen to a few of Bruce's songs, and you'll discover that verse 1 is 8 bars and verse 2 is 9. But you don't know that it's 9 because he pedals some chord and the lyrics don't necessarily rhyme at the end, and they go on, and all of a sudden you're into the chorus and you're going, oh, well, this is cool, and you don't realize that he's just added an extra bar or two or thrown in a halftime bar or something like that. That's a wonderful technique, but it's difficult to master. Right. And so first-time songwriters, they generally stay away from it.
It sounds like so much of what you're describing is process, that there's a technique to the silence and a technique to when to allow something and when not to allow something, how to guide and steer, that a lot of it is kind of sleight of hand, even though it's completely conscious and deliberate and well-informed.
But also the letting things happen naturally, right? Not pushing too much.
Yeah, well, that's one of the difficult things of, I would like to get somewhat of a career speaking at some of our engineering schools around, just for the purpose of being able to inform these students that are coming out, and they've gone through the Pro Tools, they've gone through the recording, the mic techniques, this, that, and the other thing, to go, look, out there in the real world, it's a little bit different. You have to learn to let it happen. If you are getting a drum sound and the drummer forgot his other snare drum and the one that he's playing sounds like he's hitting a Folgers coffee can, well, live with it. Let it go. Don't, oh my God, can we tune that way down, or can we do this, or put a muffler on, or this, or that? Well, you can do any of those things. It's fine. And it's going to make it sound like what it sounds like. But as with writing a song and putting it out there, be ready to live with it, because that drum sound or that vocal, or even in the case of engineering, that mix, that could be it. That could be the one that you're living with. And if you're the artist, you could be playing that song on stage for the next 30 years and be happy with it. Also be happy that it's such a popular song that you are playing it for the next 30 years. But as a engineer and a mixer, that's one of my watchwords is be happy with whatever you put to tape. Now, I've got probably about 40 songs out there, maybe more, that are rough mixes.
Oh, wow.
That's great.
Really?
That's the ideal, though, right?
Let's see. What was it? I'm trying to think. The Bob Dylan record, Shot of Love.
Oh, wow.
All of those were rough mixes.
It's amazing.
Bruce's Nebraska record, which that was mixes right off of the cassette. I've got several others. And, I listen to them and I go, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
That was good.
So, Shot of Love, if we could just take a second.
Bang!
You're killing me. You're killing me. Obviously recorded live.
Oh, yeah.
Brutally live.
Yes.
But you must have known that going in, that's how he was going to roll.
Well, yeah, I approached it as we were recording a record. We had musicians. It's one of these where guys nowadays would go, wow. 2 drummers, Jim Keltner, for those who remember him, and Ringo Starr.
Okay. At the same time? No.
At the same time.
Wow.
In the same room, and the room was not much bigger than this room. A little bit longer.
What studio?
Clover.
Oh, okay, great.
2 drummers, Tim Drummond, bass player. 3 guitar players. Cooch was one. Taggart, I think, was another. And then there was a third one. Guy Johnson, I think, famous saxophone player. A guy on piano. I think Smitty Smith was on organ. And 3 background singers. And Bob playing either acoustic or electric guitar and singing.
Some electric, yeah.
All live.
All live. Wow.
In the same room. And Bob didn't want to use headphones. So I had my headphone amp. I'd found these little Fostech speakers or something, and I plugged into them. And it was loud enough so that people could hear the stuff.
He didn't want anyone on headphones.
Right.
Just
no one
himself.
was on headphones.
No one.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And we kept a 2-track running all the time.
Right.
And when Bob was with a guitar in his hand and anywhere near a microphone, the multi-track ran. And we just went through the songs and, let's do this. And then we'd go on to others. And, here's a great example of another one of my war stories. We were recording a song, and we'd been having a hard time getting it. Done 2 or 3 takes, and it just didn't seem to be turning out correctly. And so we took a little lunch break, and Clover Studios was sort of in the middle of the block, and down at the east end of the block was Ernie's Burrito House. Well, everybody would walk down to Ernie's and have a taco or a burrito or something like that, and then they'd come back. So everybody reconvenes, and we start playing, and right off the bat after lunch, we get this take, and everybody goes, wow, it's great. And following in protocol, I didn't say anything during the take because it was going very well. But at the end of the take, we listened to it and go, wow, it's great. I go, Tim, the bass player, wasn't here. He was still down at Ernie's Burrito House finishing his burrito.
Oops.
And Bob's response was, I guess he wasn't supposed to be on the take.
That's the key.
Chuck was like, oh my God, we've got to put the bass on that. And Bob's terminology for it was, oh, you mean you want to overdo that part? And so when Tim came back, Tim tried to put the bass on it. Bob goes, none of this is working. And I forget which song it was, but one of those songs on there doesn't have a bass on it. And we liked it that way. And so that's the way it was.
Would you do it 15 or 30 ips? You do 15 probably, right?
It depends on the project. For that, I forget which it was. If it was heavy rock and roll, generally 15 ips.
Right.
If it was a higher class or grade of music, pop or jazz or something like that, 30 IPS.
And that's for the noise floor?
For the fidelity recording, 30 is a little bit clearer.
Right.
15 has a little bit more bottom end to it. And you do that. I mean, I could write out a scenario of what provides this and that, in that I generally used an MCI 24 track, which I liked because it was very clean, clear, and had good bottom end. And I used Scotch 250 tape with it at +5. And I knew that would give me what I wanted back later. The other end of the scale was an Ampex 1200 using Ampex tape on it, which had this big bump at 350 cycles, and the top end, which they referred to as natural. kind of rolled off a little bit and wasn't
A little soft.
Yeah, it was a little bit softer, and then just like in those days, I recorded that stuff on an API console, and the other one, if you couldn't get on an API, was to go onto a Neve, because they had a lot of iron in the form of transformers and whatever, and that tended to beef up the sound.
Right.
If you wanted some, lighter sound, a Harrison or an MCI, or when they came into being SSLs,
right.
And all these things go into your thought process, which I think in one interview or something I said, well, I don't think about any of this stuff. You just do it.
You just know it.
Yeah, I don't process it. I don't make the artist sing the song 4 times in front of 4 different microphones.
Right.
I go, it's a 110-pound skinny girl. I don't want to put her on a thin microphone. I want to get her on a U47 or something like that, or an M49. Let's get some beef into that voice and put it through some tube materials.
I remember there was like a 2 or 3 year span where we'd put up 4 mics and listen to each mic, and then it was like we'd judge them and people would vote. And then it was like after 3 years, it was like, fuck this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Put up the 48. Or put up the the Crowley Trip or the SM7.
The other aspect, which I learned from that engineer doing the jazz sessions when I first started out, so I said, well, you're doing this jazz thing, and Ernie Watts walks in the door and hears the song.
Yeah.
And wants to do a sax solo, and he happens to have his sax out in the car, and he's going to run out and grab it and come in and do it. What mic to use? And his response was the closest one to the door. And I said, well, what about that? And he goes, we're here to get the performance.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter.
I work with a guy named Johnny Gale, who I once said to him, we were doing a piano thing. I said, so where would you like the mic? And he went, in the room?
Yeah, well, that's it. I just saw a thing on, over the internet the other day, Al Schmidt talking about his experience with Ray Brown and Masquerade.
Oh, George Benson.
Joe Benson, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that story.
And he said that they had recorded and the whole album was instrumental. And then they come up with this last song, Masquerade. Right. And Al was like, what, a vocal? And so he grabbed this RCA something or other. It was a mic that, it was just, as I think it was Ed Cherney said, oh, it's one of those mics that you can hammer nails with.
Oh, yeah, 57.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a 57, but it was something. And Al goes, yeah. So I put it up in front of him, and the guy sang it, and that was the vocal. He did it with the track.
Right.
And Al said, I was here to, sounded fine. He said the next time when he came back, Al had put up like a 47, his standard go-to mic, and the guy said, well, no, I want that little gray thing. Al said, took me about 20 minutes to talk him into using the better microphone, and it had been fine for that song.
Right.
And that's the thing that, it's just another story that goes with, and Al's term at the end of it was, well, whatever mic it was, I'm here to record the performance.
Right. Yeah. I think that album also, I believe it was recorded with 2 mics in the middle of the room, and that was it.
Get out, really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Body Talk. It wasn't this Masquerade. It was the album, George Benson album.
Okay.
That he did for CTI. That was put everyone around, threw up a couple of mics.
Yeah. Well, been done before.
Right.
Actually, Al
probably
Schmidt
by him, right?
Yeah, Al Schmidt would be one to know since he had been recording back since there was only one mic and one fader on the console.
Do you still live in L.A.?
No, I live in Montana. I live in a town called Whitefish, Montana.
Wow.
It's in the northwestern corner, literally 55 miles from the Canadian border.
Wow.
About 100 miles as the crow flies from the Idaho border. 24 miles from Glacier Park.
Wow.
God.
How'd you end up there?
A friend of mine had bought a house up there, and when I was living in Los Angeles, he used to come down and stay with me. And he said, oh, you got to come up. And so I went up, and I went, wow, this is great. And so I ended up buying a house and moving up there. And
How long have you been there?
28 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, quite a while. Commuting.
Wow.
So do you commute for work, or do you work out of the house, or both?
I have a studio in town that I work at, and like I say, I've mixed a few things there, and I work on them, and I've recorded, local groups, things like that.
Right.
And,
Can people send you stuff? Are you happy?
Oh, I'd love it.
Right.
Yeah, that's. I did a couple of pop records for a producer that had lived in Denver, and he moved up to the area, and he said, "Oh, can you mix this?" And so I did it, and the one, I think he said that they used it as their single, and then the other one, it was some sort of a spec deal, and the girl got a record deal from it. I haven't followed up to say, hey, well, if she got the deal,
Right.
But,
Hook a brother up.
Yeah, right. But it's nice. It's a small town. I think we're probably pushing 7,000 people now, which around here and elsewhere in the world, they're like, 7,000?
In this floor, there's probably 7,000.
Oh, yeah.
7,000 rat tails.
Right. Yeah.
But it must be stunningly beautiful.
It is.
I mean, I've been to Glacier, and that's incredible.
Yeah,
You have been?
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I love it. And if you don't mind the weather, which
cold.
the weather's okay, but
Right.
we have 4 seasons. And, from beginning mid-December, there's going to be about a foot of ground out in front of your
Right.
house, and it'll last through March.
If somebody called you today and said, I want to make a record with you, where do you want to do it? Do it up there, or do you have a your favorite studio in the world? Or
It would depend on the record and the material.
right,
My favorite studios, Power Station. If not, then it would be what's now Henson, formerly A&M Studios in Los Angeles.
Right.
They're good.
and is it based on the sound of the room, the desk,
Location.
the maintenance, the
All of the above.
right?
The Power
assistants?
Station, the reason being for that, and also the A&M now Henson Studios, is the fact that they were run and designed by engineers. Right. Tony Bon Jovi designed and built the Power Station, and it is an incredible studio. You can tell it's ergonomically friendly to an engineer.
So friendly.
You can reach the patch bay; it's right there. They got the
coffee cup
board,
thing with the wheels
everything
around.
is right there, and the board is this big, and everything works. And then
Doors slide. You can isolate what you need
yeah,
to.
exactly. Out at A&M, that was the result of Jimmy and Shelley taking tours of as many studios as they could get into. And then, of course, I have to say that were I doing a project, the other studio that comes to mind is the one that I'm associated with, is Sound on Sound out in New Jersey. And they have
new one.
The new one.
Yeah, and they have
Claire.
a System 5 and a 8078, I think, like
That's
that.
Dave Amel's place, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, great.
It's great.
Have you checked it out yet?
What's that?
Sound on Sound, the new place.
No, I've just heard about it.
Yeah, we should check that out at one
Yeah,
point.
it's a great place. Get out. He'll be happy to give a tour.
Yeah.
Great. So, any chance you have any Eventide stories?
Well, yes. And this one was related to me by Bruce Jackson, who was Springsteen's front of house engineer for many years. Prior to that, he had done Elvis, supposedly one of the first guys to fly a PA system for Elvis.
A custom
in
PA
Vegas.
system.
Yeah,
Right.
up in the air. Before that, I think they just stacked the speakers on the ground. But Bruce Jackson was, I think, in Europe at a, Oktoberfest festival or something like that. And there was a polka band with 4 or 5 accordion players. And he was doing the front of house, but he was also sending the monitor mix up on stage. And he had just received a new harmonizer. This is a new thing.
What year are we talking?
76, 77?
Yeah, it had to be, in the
Right?
mid-70s, something like that. And, he knew how it worked, and he had it so that he could put it on any channel. And so he decided to have a little fun. And the 4 or 5 accordion players were up there, and he'd run one of them through the thing and send that back to the stage monitors. And whenever he felt like it, he just, we go out of tune. And all four of them would look at each other like, okay, who goofed?
Accordion fight.
And then and I don't know whether he was able to put it through different monitors or whatever, but he said that he was the only one to enjoy that humor, but it went on for 15 or 20 minutes during their songs.
He just did it for himself anyway.
He'd tweak it and they'd, good, God, and I did the same thing years later on the recording of a very famous album. And the piano player had made a mistake. And it was analog. And we went through and I found the mistake. And he goes, okay, well, we'll fix that. Are there any others? And I said, yeah, I think there is. Let's play on. And so the music played a little bit further. And I said, I think there's one right here. And that's when I tweaked the harmonizer. And oh, yeah. Oh, wow. And I go, yeah, let's check and make sure where I need to punch in and punch out at. And so I backed up. We'd hear the piece of music, and I wouldn't do it that time. And he, wow, it seemed all right. And I go, well, I don't know. Let's check it again. This time I'd do it.
And the guy is out at the piano.
No, he's in the control room, but he couldn't see me.
Yeah.
This was at the power station where they have a rack of things right to the right-hand side of the engineer. Right. Everything was very oriented to the engineer. And so I'd just slip my left hand down there and be looking, and I'd tweak it when I wanted. And I was leading him around for a few passes over the song till that, oh, here's a mistake. Oh, wait, no, it isn't. It's okay. Wait, no, yes, it is.
That's so good.
So that's the trick to making great classic records.
Well, it's humor in the studio is a good thing because it breaks up the seriousness of it.
So did you give the piano player a heart attack?
No, okay. I did not. After a few minutes of doing that, and he was like, gee, what's going on? I said, I got to confess, I've been doing it to you.
Yeah.
And he was like, huh? And I showed him, and he went, he was a little upset, but it was all in good fun.
One of the great uses of the harmonizer.
The harmonizer.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
What an honor to have you, man.
It was,
thank you.
It was a great bump into, you know what I mean? Because had we not been up there, we wouldn't have met you and asked you to come down. It's fantastic.
Well, that's good.
What a treat.
I'm pleased to come down because I am the antithesis of networking.
Right.
I don't, I've been working for the same guy under the radar for many years.
Right.
And I'm never like, hey, here, me.
Yeah, that's me.
And,
you're a business guy.
I've got the rubber nose on, the clown suit. I'm like, hey, come on.
And so the opportunity to talk to somebody.
I think I spotted that in you.
It's like, oh, okay, sure, I'll do that.
Me and Stewie want to thank all you gear clubbers for listening to this crazy podcast we do. If you can, leave a review on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And don't be shy. We love hearing from you guys on the social media at Gear Club Podcast. Don't forget to go to gearclubpodcast.com for Spotify playlists, links and photos for the episodes, and my favorite hot sauce of the month.